Hello, everybody. My name is Carla Whitaker, and I have a degree in literature. I have a post-secondary teaching credential, and what I'm going to be talking about today is how to write an argumentative, or also called a persuasive essay. This video specifically is being done for the NCBFAA, that's the National Customs Brokers and Forwarders Association of America. And as part of the program, you have to do an MCS, MES persuasive essay. And the staff there wanted to make sure that you had a clear guide with some tips and some guidelines. And so I'm going to go through each step of how you come up with the idea for the essay, how you develop a thesis, how you support it, and a little bit about how to write it in APA style. So I want to remind everybody that we are here to support you. And if you have questions, you should ask. But remember that you can do this. Sometimes it seems intimidating or like a big task, but when you break it down into reasonable chunks for yourself, it becomes a doable thing. And so I want everybody to believe and have faith that they can do it. I'm also going to be sharing a slide deck throughout, and you will also have access to this slide deck, including the links in it. Some of it would get very tedious if I were just to read you word for word what is APA style and what is every requirement of it. So I will try not to keep it too dull in that regard, and I will let you click on links and go to things and look up sample papers and sample abstracts and things like that on your own. But I do want you to know that along with this video, that you can keep and play at any time and fast forward and pause and so forth. You also have access to the slide deck, and I wish you best of luck and hope you use it. All right, I'm going to go ahead and begin to share my slides. I will share my screen, and then we will get started. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is get into this persuasive essay. The essay is persuasive, also called argumentative. You might or might not have done this type of writing before for something like a high school class or a college class. If you're not familiar with it, I'm going to go through what makes something persuasive and not simply informative or creative writing, and how it has to be backed by research. But the first step that you're going to do is you have to develop your thesis and collect relevant data. And let's talk about, well, how do I do that? What is a thesis? How do I begin thinking about this? So in your program, you have been learning a lot about importing into the USA. You've been learning a lot about cross-border trade, okay? As you just think about that as a general topic, are there any specific issues that you feel passionate about, and why? So start to just think about your own opinion. Is there something that really interests me, really gets me passionate, or that I really have a strong feeling about? And why is that? If you have a strong opinion or argument about importing and about cross-border trade, that maybe you want to convince people that this opinion of yours is valid and it is correct, that is where you start to get the seeds of what might become your thesis. And then the next step is, what evidence or examples could you cite or do you have that support your opinion? So writing a thesis that only might be a sentence or two, that doesn't sound too intimidating or too long, but it's going to be the crux of your entire essay. So you want to make sure you have a strong thesis, something you really truly feel, and something that you can stand behind, something that can be backed up with data that you have actually collected or read or heard and so forth. So that is step one. Start thinking about cross-border trade, start thinking about maybe issues you feel passionate about, and ask yourself, do I have a strong opinion or a strong argument about something related to cross-border trade? Okay, so what makes a thesis a thesis? Why isn't it just a regular sentence, or what are they looking for in a thesis statement? It's very brief. It's only maybe, like I said, 1 or 2 sentences, but it's the whole driving force of your essay. So there's 3 main things in the case of a persuasive or argumentative essay that a thesis should be. It should be debatable, all right? It should have a strong stance, and it should be persuasive. So what do each of these things mean? Let's start with debatable versus non-debatable. So if someone were to make this statement, cats are very different from dogs, there's really no debate about that. They are indeed a different species, and they are indeed different, okay? So there's not like anyone that's going to get in a debate or an argument about that. What would make this more of an argumentative thesis if you took an opinion about it? For example, a debatable thesis might be cats make better pets than dogs, or dogs make better pets than cats. All right. And it's possible you would have experience in this subject or an opinion that would back it up. So the first thing you want your thesis to do is to not just be a statement of fact, but to be an opinion or an argument. All right, something that could be debated if you were having a debate or a discussion with somebody. The second thing that you want your thesis to do is have a strong stance. The stance is kind of like your stand. This is the stand I'm taking. Here's an example of a weak stance because it's very vague. Something should be done about pollution. Well, maybe you feel that way, but first of all, why? And also, what is that something? Okay, so that's a stance, but it's a rather weak stance. If you wanted to change that into a strong stance, it might sound more like this. The government should spend 25% of its budget on pollution and climate control. Okay, so now you have an actionable thing, and it's also debatable because somebody should say, no, there's no way we should spend that much, or no, there's no way we should spend that little, or there's no way we should spend anything at all. So it is something that is debatable. It's a strong stance, and it's, even though it's not fact, it's strong. Okay. Also, you want to make sure that this is not just an informative essay. This is not just a research paper where you're presenting research or informing the reader. You're actually persuading them of something. So here's an example of an informative thesis. It might say something like, there are 3 main types of imports to the US. Okay, great thesis for an informational essay, but we're looking for a persuasive essay. So you want your thesis to be something like, we should impose considerably less taxes on US imports than we currently do in order to encourage global trade, or something along those lines. You want it to be something that's actually persuasive. It's not just a statement of fact. You're trying to get someone to agree with your opinion. So that brings us to the next thing, which is, what is the goal of this essay? It doesn't have to be all of these, but it should probably be one of the following. You either want to move your reader to action. You want it to be so persuasive that they might, whoever the audience is, might actually act upon, consider your thesis and act upon it. And if not that strong, depending who your audience is, it might be at least convincing the reader that your opinion is correct. You're backing it up with evidence, or persuading the reader that at least your opinion is worth considering. So even if you're not going to maybe change their mind, they'll at least start listening and hearing your ideas and realizing that you have a logical thesis, you have evidence to back it up. They may or may not agree, but at least your opinion is worth reading and worth considering. So those are some of the things that make a good persuasive essay. Okay, so if we talk about the essay, this specific essay, I want to tell you what it needs to do. So in the first paragraph, you're going to need to include a clear, concise, defined thesis statement. And in this case, your topic needs to be directly related to cross-border trade in the US. Directly related to cross-border trade. That's the subject, but that's not the thesis. You have to come up with a thesis. Like with any essay, you want to use clear and logical transitions between the introduction, the body paragraphs, and the conclusion, and of course to use correct grammar and spelling throughout, like you would in any scholarly or educational paper, okay? You want to support the major argument and any sub-arguments with support for every claim. So evidential support can be a lot of different things. It can be case studies that you're citing. It can be published data, or it can be collected data, maybe even data that you have collected yourself. Okay, body paragraphs are where one should include evidential support. So all of the support, all of the evidence, that goes in the body paragraphs. Okay, it can be factual, it can be logical, statistical, or even anecdotal, which means kind of telling a story to make your point. Okay, but that's where it goes. The evidence goes somewhere in the body paragraphs. All right, to really build your argument and really prove this is the evidence. Finally, you're going to write a conclusion that does not simply restate the thesis, but it readdresses it considering the evidence provided. So now that your reader has read all of this evidence, they can now consider, okay, well, what do I want to come away with? What is my final thought considering everything that's been presented? And finally, as far as formatting, you want to use what's called APA format. And again, there's some links to this that you've been provided, so make sure to research those on your own. You need to correctly cite all your sources that are used on the reference page, and you need to incorporate in-text citations where appropriate, and that's going to probably be in your body paragraphs. All right, so this is some of the technical stuff. All right, before I get into the ideas and the convincing, what about the technical stuff? How long does this have to be? How, what's the spacing? What's the format? So they would like this paper to be at least 1,500 words. So 1,500 words is the minimum, and 1,500 words typed out in 12-point font, double spaced, is about 6 pages. All right, if you were to single space it, that would be about 3 pages, but APA format requires double spacing. So you're talking about aiming for at least 1,500 words, or to aim for about 6 pages. They say the average essay is between 1,500 and 3,000 words. And in terms of pages, if it were double spaced, that would be somewhere between 6 pages and 12 pages. So you want to definitely go to at least meet the minimum, okay, of the 1,500 words, and there'll be a word count in any, Google Docs or Word or any program like that. But you want to go for at least 1,500 words, but you don't need to think really longer than 3,000 words probably. So in this minimum 6-page essay, you are going to double space all the text. So double spacing, that makes it more readable. So that is standard. They would also like you to use a readable font, a professional font. We're not talking cursive, we're not talking Comic Sans. And some of the standard ones that they recommend are either Times New Roman. If you use Times New Roman, they recommend 12-point. Or maybe something like Arial, Calibri, or Georgia, those would probably be 11-point. Okay, but those are some standard professional, easily readable fonts that everyone would have access to. The standard margins in a paper like this are 1 inch on all sides. You want to indent the first line of every paragraph about 1/2 inch. Okay, it'll also include the paper title. Yes, your paper has to have a title on the top left of every page. We call it flush left or left justified. And the page number at the top right of every page. So the page number would be flush right or right justified. It's easy to do that with most formatting, like in Google Docs or Word. You also are going to include a title page, a professional paper title page. You'll include an abstract page. And then at the end of the essay, you're also going to include a reference page at the end that is a list of the documentation that you've cited. So there's a link later on in this slideshow and that you've been provided that will actually show you so that you can enlarge this and you can go online and read others. But this is a sample title page of a professional paper. Now, this particular example is for a university. Okay, so it's the Department of English at Purdue University. Since you're not producing this for a specific college or university, yours is going to look a little bit different, but it is going to have the title, the actual full title of whatever you would like to name your essay, and any notes if you want to include a website or anything like that, or email contact. So it's just a simple title page, but this would be the standard for papers that are being considered for publication in a professional journal. So sample title page. Then you're going to have an abstract page. The abstract is very simple. All it is basically is a 1-paragraph description of the key points of your research. Okay, so you don't have to get into a lot of specifics. They want it very nice and short. They're saying an absolute maximum of 250 words. So basically just one paragraph, and it basically lets the reader know, okay, I'm going to read this paragraph and it's going to be able to tell me everything this paper is, not everything, but it's going to be able to tell me the general idea of what this paper is about, what it's going to include. And again, this is something that it wouldn't typically be required if you were just like a student in a high school class, but because this might be going on to publication, an abstract is a page that they like to see if they're considering something for publication. So they'll have a brief abstract page. And then you'll get into the paper itself. All right, but at the very end, you're also going to have a references page. If it's just one reference, it would just be called reference. But if it is multiple ones, which you probably have multiple references, it's called references. Now, when I was young, they used to call this a bibliography because it was always books that you were citing. And then it became works cited as there became more digital publications available. And now it's called a references page. It's listed alphabetically. And again, I'm not going to go into every detail of how this should be formatted, but if you look at the link online, you should be able to see how it will have the names of authors, the names of titles, if it includes something like a website that it came from, or a chapter or article that's specifically being cited. And you'll see kind of on the right, very specific comments. Again, that's something you can go into and look at later, but this is what happens at the end. It's your list of references that you're citing, and you'll need that at the end of your paper. Okay, so now we're on to step 2, and this is really the part that takes the most time, but hopefully it will be easy if you've come up with a good thesis and you've collected all your evidence. So step 2 is actually writing the paper, writing it out. So you start with your introduction paragraph, right, which has a well-crafted thesis at the end, something that you're trying to persuade the reader about cross-border trade. You decide on how many subpoints or sub-arguments you have. Maybe you're going to have 2. Maybe you're going to have 3 or 4. There's no specific minimum or maximum. You just want to consider how many total arguments or sub-arguments points that you want to put in. And basically each one of them becomes a paragraph or a set of paragraphs. Each argument should be supported by evidence, and that evidence should be cited in APA format. Okay, where you usually have something like, if it's in quotes, for example, then after it in parentheses, you might have the name of the text or the author's name and a page number that you got it from. In terms of how many paragraphs should you have, if you have to err on the side of too few or too many, I would say err on the side of too many paragraphs. It's usually better to split things into several paragraphs than to have super long paragraphs that go on for pages or for more than a page. You want the paragraphs to be easily digestible, easily understandable. It helps the reader when they read to have things that are set into smaller chunks or smaller parts. All right. But the number of paragraphs, there's not a certain requirement or a certain length that each paragraph should be. Some paragraphs might be longer than others, some might have more or less evidence than others, and that's okay. All right. So the number of points within your essay or the number of paragraphs is going to be up to you and what works best for your writing. Okay, as long as it's organized. So I know that I only have one slide on step 2, but it is technically the part that will take the longest, writing the paper. Like I said, once you have your thesis and your idea in mind, and you've collected some research, this part shouldn't be actually too bad. It will take some time, but now you're on your way. So there is one more thing that I want to point out that most scholarly persuasive papers have, and that is a counter argument and your rebuttal. So after you've presented all your arguments and all your evidence, this is toward the end of the essay, you also might want to consider the other side. Because this is a debatable thesis, what would someone debate about? Well, you want to think about that, and you might want to write just 1 or 2 paragraphs that show an opposing view, but then refute that view by showing how their evidence is not as strong or as logical as your own. I'll show you what I mean. So let's say that this is your thesis. I know this doesn't have anything to do with cross-border trade, but I just wanted to keep it as simple as possible. So let's say your thesis is all 10-year-old children should be given a cell phone because children and parents can communicate immediately in case of emergencies. And parents can use an app that way to track the child's location, which is really important for safety to always know where your child is. So let's say you've done a whole essay and you've brought up evidence for why this is good for children's safety. Well, what could someone counter argue? Perhaps somebody would argue something like, well, this could mean that the child becomes addicted to technology too young. Or this could mean that the child could access inappropriate content because probably their cell phone would have access to the internet or something like that. And we all know that there's a lot of dangerous stuff out there. So you want to acknowledge these concerns. Someone does have a valid counter argument, but how could you rebut it? You could put a statement something like this. People can become addicted to many things. It's about setting a good example at home, enforcing guidelines, and educating kids about what is appropriate. The pros of child safety outweighs the cons of, well, what if this happens or that happens? Okay, so after presenting your argument, you might introduce a counter argument briefly, and you don't want to make fun of it or disparage it. Someone has a valid concern, but you can rebut it. You're kind of saying, well, this is a good point, but the stronger evidence supports this other thing that you've been spending many pages now proving. Okay, and step 4, this is the last paragraph in your paper. It's writing a conclusion. So you will restate in slightly different words what the topic is and why it is important. So why is cross-border trade an important topic here? You want to review the main points that you brought up and bring up your thesis again. And remind the reader of some of the main evidence you provided and why, in light of this evidence, your thesis is strong. Okay, so the conclusion is similar to the introduction, but this isn't the first time they've read it. Now they've read it, the introduction, but they've also read all the evidence that you've come up with to support it. They've even read maybe a counter argument and your rebuttal to that counter. So now you have the end where you can kind of sum it all up, restate the importance of this, and kind of remind people that the evidence came to strongly support whatever your thesis was. Okay, so only one more thing. That is step 5, which again, you want to include a references page following APA format. So if you click on this link, it will take you to the Purdue University Guide on APA Writing Style. You can see an example student essay, you can see an example professional paper, and you can see all those little technical things like how did they cite sources, how did they write their reference page at the end, what format does the reference page have to be in, that kind of thing. So that is available to you, and there's a lot of resources online that will help you with that. Okay, so my final thoughts are good luck to all of you. You might want to make sure to submit by required deadlines. That's always one of the most important things, is submitting your work by deadlines, or if there's various deadlines throughout, then make sure that you are taking the steps to meet each deadline. And also don't be afraid to ask for help if needed. We're all going to have questions on these things, and hopefully this did help, but I want everyone to feel free to reach out and ask for help or ask for guidance if they need it. So that is all I have on the essay. I wish everybody good luck. And again, I hope that the resources provided are helpful and you can come back to this guide. I wish you a lot of luck. I know that you have been studying cross-border trade. I know that you probably developed some opinions about it, and now you have the chance to back up those opinions with research and with evidence and to create a great paper. So good luck, everybody, and thank you.